Back to Hot Mess Life Coach, Season 4, Episode 12, our season finale. I am Brian Hogan, a hot mess and a life coach, because that is too allowed. And I'm here with my co-host, Margan Borbrett. Margan?
Beautiful.
Margan Borbrett is what I said. Why don't you go ahead and say your name, since you're
Let's stick with that. Morgan Borbrett. My name's Morgan Barbrett, but I like Borbrett. That's funny.
Oh my gosh. Well, hi. So we're here to talk about authenticity, good grammar, and how authenticity can have larger ripple effects and impacts as we practice it and as we apply it to global society.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but not actually grammar. We don't need to worry about that. That's not too important to our topic today.
Okay, fair enough.
Oh my gosh. Cool. Okay, so authenticity and its ripple effects. So we've kind of talked a lot over the course of this season about authenticity on kind of like a personal level, but when a person or a group of people are developing the skill of being authentic or are expanding their capacity for authenticity, then that does have broader impacts on society, broader impacts on your relationships. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, and so the broader impact, before we start talking about the broader impact, actually, if it's okay, I want to mention something, because we talked in previous episodes about sometimes it's authentic to keep your mask on, right? Sometimes it's authentic to hold back a piece of your truth because if it's not safe, or because you're in an oppressive system of some kind. And that's a little bit kind of what we're going to be touching on today too, is the sort of the larger systems in which we find ourselves, and what is the role of authenticity within the context of these larger systems. And how do we recreate the larger systems, if we can, to actually be authentic and aligned with who we are as a species in our authenticity? So the reason I'm saying all that is because while it is authentic to hold things back if you need to for safety, I want to present another concept, which is like peaceful authenticity, which is sort of different than survival mode authenticity, which is what we've been talking about kind of both this whole season, and we've been talking about both sort of as if they're the same thing. And this morning when I was thinking about this topic, I started to realize there's sort of like, it's not that they're different versions of authenticity. It's just that like, there's the authenticity of like, this is what I have to do. So I'm not faking it or hiding or being false. I have to do this for safety. That's survival mode authenticity, but it's still authenticity. And then there's like this deeper, peaceful authenticity where you are actually able to be your full, true, authentic self in community, in relationship, out and proud in the context of the larger system. And what I realized is that peaceful authenticity, that one that we really, that makes us feel deeply connected and like we belong, it's actually not possible when basic needs are not being met.
That's true.
So I just wanted to throw that out there, is that if you're not in that place of peaceful authenticity, it's because we're at a place in society where that's actually being denied to large swatches of the population all the time in perpetuity, and it's not your fault. We're doing the best that we can here.
Yeah. And also within any given population, there's going to be some people who have more and less resources to be able to exist in that peaceful authenticity. And so for those people who are able, for those people who do have their basic needs met and do have, more of a capacity to exist in that peaceful authenticity, those are the people that then like increase the level of role models, increase the level of like visibility of what it looks like to exist in that authenticity. And without those role models, without the people who like have frankly the privilege to be able to be authentic and then takes advantage of that privilege to be able to be authentic, like those are the people that are able to kind of like encourage other people to find their way there, to eventually be able to also have that privilege.
Encouraging other people to find their way there is one aspect of that, and the other aspect is like it's showing all of the collective species at large what's possible when people are being peacefully authentic. So it's not even like we're it's not even like if you can take advantage of your privilege to be able to live peacefully and authentically, you're not just like way showing for people with less means to try to come where you are. You're also trying to way show for people who have more means than you to also become more authentic, because
Mhm.
the authentic intrinsic core nature in humanity is one of like belonging and connectedness. And so the fact that these large systems are thriving the way they are now is because we mostly as a society are disconnected from our authenticity, not just people whose basic needs aren't being met, but people at the tippy top. And so as we reconnect
Mhm.
all the different people at all the different levels to their authenticity, it will start to seem absurd and off-putting to all the people at all the levels when systems are obsolete, oppressive, or inefficient. I mean, obviously, oppressive is way worse than inefficient, but we can also do better than inefficient. We can do better in
Yeah,
both areas, you know. So
yeah. I like how visionary we're getting today.
I also really love that you brought it down to the idea that authenticity is a privilege. It can be a privilege. Like we haven't really touched on that a whole lot this season. I guess we did in a roundabout way when we talked about sort of survival mode authenticity and how it
Yeah,
exists and that it's real. But this idea that this other kind, when really trying to strive for like spiritual enlightenment, peaceful authenticity, that kind of thing, like that there's to be able to do that in, you know, with your chenille blanket around you or whatever, while you cocoon and heal from your childhood trauma, there is a privilege inherent even in that. And that's
yeah,
not to say that spiritual enlightenment is denied to you if you don't have that kind of privilege. I mean, we hear stories of people in concentration camps who became enlightened, like Viktor Frankl. So all things are possible at all levels. And
yeah,
if you have the privilege to be able to like really focus on that aspect of your growth, then doing that helps all of society because of the ripple effects.
yeah. Yeah, and to bring it back to, like, our very first episode, I think the very first topic that we talked about was that being yourself is easier said than done, and I think depending on depending on your upbringing, depending on how other people treat you, depending on how aligned your authenticity is with what society has decided is acceptable, that all makes it easier or more difficult to be authentic. So there may be somebody, in your life who you're like, "Oh, wow, they're just always being themselves and they have no fear of, judgment from other human beings." But if you think about it, a lot of the people who are able to do that are often the people whose personalities and perhaps even like physical like bodies are more readily accepted by the broader society. And so, like you also have to, when we talk about privilege, what we're really talking about is that everyone's starting point is different, and so
Mhm.
the level of difficulty to achieve quote unquote authenticity in a very full, peaceful way is going to be more or less difficult for every person.
Yeah, exactly. That actually reminds me of an article when we were researching for like the science part of authenticity. There's an article that was published in Sage Journals in 2019, and it said the two main things about authenticity were that you have to feel like the thing that you're doing is self-authored, which we've talked about, and that the
Mhm.
thing that you're doing is genuine. And so if you're in a place where your basic needs aren't being met or something like that, then it feels less and less like self-authoring, which then feels less and
Yeah,
less able to be authentic. And if you're in a place where you're oppressed because your identity is not the one accepted by society, even like at any level, it could be oppression like you're hiding in a war zone, or it could be oppression like you feel you feel shamed for the way that your body is or something like that. So like whatever level it is, but if that's what's happening, then it's harder to feel genuine and to act genuine in society because a part of you has to hide. Not that you're being false, but you're in survival mode authenticity, right? And
yeah,
so the if you can't choose because choices are limited, then you don't have the ability to feel self authorship. And if you can't be genuine because your identity isn't embraced or allowed by culture, then you also can't access that sort of peaceful self authorship either. So it's like you said, the different starting points, right? And like understanding where those different starting points, how those different starting points have an impact, and what are the things affecting the starting point. And like, it's sometimes it's not as easy to see. Like skin color, it's easy to see, but like there's the invisible things too, like our how much childhood trauma you've gone through, or sexual orientation, for example, is an invisible one, right? So some stuff like that, that it's actually hard to tell that people have
Mhm.
different starting points, and yet we do. And so
Yeah.
I don't know, I guess that's a rant for non-judgment, for being non-judgmental as we all move through this journey towards better authenticity.
Yeah, and also, um, regardless of where your starting point is at, there's also ways to improve, like, your ability to get to where you wanna be, so improving your coping mechanisms, increasing the level of community or connection that you feel with other people who also hold similar identities or who perhaps have similar experiences, backgrounds, starting points as you. All of those things, and there's I suppose a very broad uh, number of ways of doing that. Um, but increasing those things improve your starting point or improve um, your ability to reach for a more peaceful authenticity because then you have somebody backing you up. Like for example, like I'm gonna like if you're wanting to be out and proud, having
Mhm.
other people in your life who are out and proud makes that easier because you're not doing it by yourself.
That's so true. I can testify to that because I was proudly in the closet until I was 23 years old. And that was because that was all during my born again Christian phase. And so like
Mhm.
I became born again, I guess, when I was like 15 or 16, and I died again when I was like 23. So, but in that time, in that time, I was like, happily and satisfied about being in the closet because I was struggling against my homosexuality to become straight. And when I was 17, I came out like one foot out the door to my mom and like two close friends, and I was like, I'm gay, but hear me out here. I'm switching it up. Don't worry. I'm going to be straight really soon. So you don't have to worry about me. And then when I was 23 and died again, I was in college and it was Oberlin. And that's, I mean, that's very, very, very metrosexual type of place. Like, straight people want to go down on you just because they're curious. So it's like, it's very, very, so there was suddenly I was surrounded by people that were out and proud and people that were straight and proud to pretend they were gay. Like so much was the opposite of like where I had come from. And so like I came out of the closet in that environment because it was easier
Yeah.
to step towards my peaceful, authentic self in an environment where I knew the person I was trying to become was going to be allowed to be.
Yeah. Yeah, the survival part of ourselves is constantly measuring, like, how is this going to be received? If I were to be totally open and honest about how I really feel, if I were to be, like, super clear about who I am with the people around me, how do I think they would react? Would I be punished or would I be celebrated?
Or met with indifference.
Yeah, or met with indifference, and that is a part of our calculation when we're, like, deciding or trying to build up the courage to be ourselves. Um, and I mean, there's something to be said about, like, you could still perceive danger and for some reason have enough motivation and drive to come out even in the face of danger. There are some people who do that, but usually that would require having, you know, a whole different set of coping skills to be ready for that.
Yeah.
So, and maybe this is, I'm not sure if this is off topic or not, but I remember when I was like a kid or in high school that sometimes people would be like talking of like other students who were gay, like they would say, "Oh, why don't they just be honest? Like we can tell. Why don't they just be honest? Why are they lying about it? Blah blah blah." And that like just that I remember this really reverberates in my head because it's such a misunderstanding. Like just the fact that they were saying that is such a misunderstanding of like how that works. If people felt safe and included and welcomed, then it wouldn't be difficult to come out and be honest. But the
Mhm.
fact of the matter is that society is structured in a way that makes it difficult to do that. So to be like, oh, why aren't they being honest? Is just like unkind and shitty.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it just betrays a lack of understanding of what someone's going through.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A total lack of. So what then, what are let's get visionary. Like, what are some ideas for how we could, like, you talked about the people who have the privilege to be peacefully authentic, and if they live that way it can be an example. It's also like if we just have conversations about like what the world could be like and try to paint the picture of like what it might be like
Yeah.
one day, like my friend Hannah, who's she's studying to be a counselor now too, and she's like a sort of a thought leader person, and she always says like, imagine that, like, and like some sort of utopia type idea,
Yeah.
not overly simplistic, like often complex and well thought out. And it's like, imagine that, like imagine if we had a, one thing she said one time said was, imagine if we had a political system where everybody was excited to understand what the candidates stood for, because we it was a hard decision to make who to choose because they all had so much to offer.
Mm,
Imagine that,
that'd
as
be nice.
opposed to now, where it's like we have to choose between the lesser of two evils because they all have nothing to offer.
Mm.
So it's like we like so with that in mind, how what would be a more authentic version of some of the most inauthentic institutions we have? Like, does anything come to mind for you?
For some reason, I mean, maybe it's because you were talking about somebody who you're in, like, courses in school with, but I'm thinking about, like, academically, academic institutions in terms of how there are certain behaviors or character traits that are celebrated and others that are not or discouraged, like, depending on your level of focus, depending on, um, whether you're, like, spending a lot of time on your schoolwork or not. Because what I'm thinking of is I remember in high school there was this girl that sat next to me in like physics class, and she would miss class a lot. But the reason that she was missing class was because she was responsible for babysitting multiple of her younger siblings. And so it was like impossible for her to show up. And I just can imagine how much like the academic institution would punish and look down upon that
Hmm.
rather than like celebrating that this person is taking responsibility for an important aspect of their life, meaning, their siblings, and then accommodating that. I think for institutions to be encouraging authenticity would be to embrace the full gamut of what a person's life can look like
Mm,
and not be imposing a singular expectation of what it means to be a good student. And I think that goes for any other institution. Imposing what it means to be a good blank and ignoring the fact that people's lives are incredibly diverse, different, um,
yeah,
like to the point where you really can't even imagine like the shape of people's lives. You just like assume that somebody else's life is like your own and that
it's
they
so
can be
true.
able to do the same things that you can do, but that's not true. That's not how life works.
Yeah, so it's almost like what you're talking about is like people's lives are incredibly dynamic and flexible and require adaptation, and yet our
Hmm.
institutions are rigid and unadaptable and like fall in
Yes.
line and do it this way. And it's almost like we're saying, what if there was a complete 180 where it was the institutions that would be adaptable, instead of trying to say the people have to become rigid like the institutions. Let's say the institutions should become adaptable and flexible and dynamic like the people, like
Yes.
life. So you're right, and academia is a really good example of that. And another area in academia where we see the lag from this inflexibility is in like the basic structure of how lessons are done, where it's like you teach something or you make the students go learn it themselves, either way, and then you come back and under threat of a bad grade you give them a test. So you know what I mean? Now everyone's sweating and in fear, and there is piles and piles and piles, like indisputable scientific literature out there now to tell us that when the human brain is in fear, it cannot learn as well. When the human
Hmm.
brain feels like it's being tested by authority instead of supported by authority, it will not retain information as well. Like we know it,
Hmm.
we know it. And yet, and we've known it for decades,
Yes.
decades. And yet the academic institutions don't change their way of doing things. It's all still very punishment and fear based, at least in the institution where I work. I mean, I know there's other types of schools out there now. So like, of course, if you're one of those activists in the education system and you're doing the opposite of what I'm saying, kudos to you. I'm just saying, like, in the giant academic system as it is across our country, there is still this like this rail of punishment and fear at the heart of trying to make young people learn. And that's totally backwards. And it's backwards, like, proven. It's not just a theory. We know it doesn't work. But we're like,
Well,
okay,
and part of why,
another crop through.
yeah, right. And part of why it's like that is because education is like highly under resourced. Like teachers need to be paid more. And like I feel like the level of resources that are being allocated towards education and the way that we're not like prioritizing it, and the distribution of like the way that finances are spent in the broader society, I think that disallows or makes it more difficult to have a system that actually adapts to be of service to people. Well, and also, you know, a lot of academia is a business. A lot of it is about, you know, profit, especially when you get into like the university, you know, level. So that gets in the way too. If our priority was to serve society, was to love our people and make it easier for us to live our lives and reach a point of thriving, then the systems would look different. But that's not the priority. That's not, you know, where the money's going.
It's so funny. It's so funny because it is my priority. It's
Yeah.
your priority,
Hmm.
right? It's what you described is probably the priority of everybody I know who
Uh-huh.
thinks about this stuff. Literally
But we're
everybody.
not in power.
Yeah, no, I know.
It's about what the people in power want. And I don't know. My dad always used to say, you know, power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so I feel like we have to solve that problem in order for any of this stuff to
Yeah, so that's an interesting
work out.
what would an authentic system look like that isn't um that isn't designed with managing power in mind?
Yeah.
Because it's the power element that's what corrupts all the systems ultimately. So
Mhm.
I wonder what a system might look like where power can't be leveraged within that system. It's just a distribution. It's just it's just a system. It's just a system. It doesn't confer special advantages if you try to take advantage of it. Like what could that even look like? Or is that not possible until there's a evolution in human consciousness, and which would then go back to continue doing your own internal self work if you want society at large to change.
Yeah. Well, my little brother would tell you to, you know, plug something into AI. Tell the AI to design a society that prioritizes the well-being of its constituents and protects against power corruption, and then do whatever the AI says.
Part of me wants to be like, okay, uh,
No, all that to say, I don't know. I'm sure that there's some sort of like algorithm that could come up with a way to protect against those things. But human beings are flawed, and so you know, having human beings um, design a system that you know basically is, oh, what's that thing we say in coaching? We say the mind that created the problem cannot solve the problem.
yeah, Albert Einstein says something like that too. He says you can't solve the
Yeah.
problem from the same consciousness that created the problem.
Yes. Yes. So it's that. So okay, Albert Einstein. I give him credit. Um,
Cool.
but all that to say, you know, when we're trying to fix things, we also have to acknowledge that like we have been raised in the culture that has the flaws, that has the power corruption, that has the fears and the lack of needs being met, and so we are operating from this brain that is within the system that partially like created the problems, but also created who we are.
Mhm.
So it's tough.
Yeah, it is tough. So, but it's conversations like this, though, just like trying to imagine the next edge of what it could look like, that help it along, right? Because like you said, we're part of the consciousness that created the problem, but as people trying to do the work, we are trying to become that next consciousness, that opposite consciousness that Albert Einstein talks about, that can solve the problem. And so
Right.
I guess it does go back to that, like continue to find the truth of who you are within you, find your opposite consciousness, and then problem
Mhm.
solve.
Yeah. Yeah. Facts, Brian.
Well, this was a pleasure. Do you have anything else you want to add?
Um, I don't think so, but one of the things that I had on my list, which we've already kind of talked about, was that as we work towards authenticity, one of the ripple effects is more transparent and ethical practices, like in business, in academics, in every institution that we have. So it's a worthwhile thing to work towards.
Yeah, exactly. Because it can have impacts on people we don't even know one day.
Yeah, true. Cool. Well, this has been a pleasure, Brian.
It has. Thank you, Mo. And everybody will be back next week with season 5, topic TBD. Until then, be
Yeah.
hot, be messy, and be blessed. Much love, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.